and this should be an interesting one. I know we've done a few weeks ago. I did a couple of sessions on dealing with difficult people, but I figured I'd come back to it because I've just lived through a very challenging experience, and I thought it might be beneficial to everybody to hear about it. So we are now at 10:30, and let's get started. So I called this dealing with difficult people, or dealing with the egg. And for those of you who may be wondering why I chose the egg, it's largely because the egg, when you think about it, it looks perfectly formed to all outward exterior view. It's strong, and when you squeeze it, it won't break. But you have to be very careful how you crack it open, because if you hit it the wrong way, you've ruined your egg, and all that's left is to scramble it. And that pretty much means the end of whatever discussion or negotiation that you're having. So I'm going to start with an interesting perspective, and this comes from the marketing world, from the world of Seth Godin, who I was rereading last night. If you haven't read his books, it's worth it if you want to get some idea of what marketing is all about. But he provides an interesting description of people and their attitudes. And what he says is, and if you don't mind, I'm just going to read it so I don't get it wrong, and so I'm not pointing at the screen. Everyone acts in accordance with their internal narrative. And you can't get people to do what they don't want to do. What they want is to take action to reinforce their internal narrative. So within the context of dealing with particularly difficult people, the first point you need to understand is we all come to the table with our particular individual view of the world and how it works and who people are. So I'm going to explain this in the context of what I just went through, which was a negotiation with a very difficult person. But and I was mediating between two parties. But his worldview was that his partners in the deal he was in were either incompetent or lying, cheating people. And I don't use those words lightly, because those are the words that he was using. And what I discovered over a period of 9 months of dealing with him was that worldview was never going to change. So in order to deal with him, I needed to accept that I wasn't going to change that perception. So that is part one. Part number two is, in terms of dealing with difficult people, part of what makes them so difficult is that they kind of know exactly how to suck the energy out of a room, and how to suck the energy out of you. As I said before, there's no changing their worldview or their narrative about what's going on. So you have a choice when you're dealing with them. You either come face to face and go into a battle with them, and a battle which is almost certainly going to break your egg in a way that you can't control it. Or you can try to get inside their head, try and understand the world from their perspective, and then deal with it. But before you can do that, you need to understand what you want to accomplish. Now, in my particular case, what I wanted to accomplish was basically a divorce between the parties. They couldn't function well together. But it's within the context of understanding that emotionally, when you're dealing with people like that, that whether you're a mediator or whether you're a party, you have to understand what's going on in your own head. And I point to the back of my head, and this is something I just learned this morning from an expert on the subject, but there's a little part of your brain at the very bottom at the base of the brain, where it meets a spinal cord, called the amygdala. And the amygdala has been in your brain forever, and it's what triggers the fight or flight reaction that I'm sure you've all heard about. And what happens is, when the amygdala gets excited or experiences fear, it sends out a huge dose of a drug called cortisol that your body manufactures to the front of your brain, and that will cause what they call the fight or flight reaction. So, since prehistoric times, your amygdala senses the danger in the room, which the egg knows how to trigger, and your initial reactions, which are being generated by chemicals your own brain is producing, are either going to cause you subconsciously to have a reaction to either fight them or to run away. So, why is that important to know? I'll put it in the context of what actually happened to me. So now we'd been going back and forth for months. So it's not like I didn't understand the beast that I was dealing with on the other side. But at one point in time, he sent me a text message that was, to my mind, so offensive that I immediately sat down and typed back the angriest possible response I could possibly make that satisfied me. And I was just about to hit the send button when I did what I usually do in these situations, which I stepped away from the keyboard, put my phone at the other end of the room where I couldn't reach it, and began to engage in some conscious thought. And that's the point where I realized I wasn't in control of what I was doing. And in fact, the chemicals in my brain had sent back the angry reaction that I was having. And I was about to satisfy that by hitting the send button. Now, how many of you have been in that situation before where somebody has said something that has totally excited and irritated you, and you just need to respond immediately? Now, when you're face to face, it's a little harder to step away. You'll have that emotional reaction and you will provoke the fight that perhaps you've come into the room expecting you were never going to have. But you do have a choice when it's on text. So I did what I often do in those situations. I looked at it, stepped away from the keyboard, hit the delete button, came back to it about half an hour later, and instead I sent him the following response. And I'm not going to use his name. I'll just call him Egg for these purposes. I said, Egg, you really know how to make me laugh. Which is probably exactly the opposite of what he was hoping to provoke in me. Because what difficult people love and need, upset that they are. But if you can diffuse with humor, you're doing two things. One, you're showing them it's not working. And two, you might actually get them to laugh. So from the perspective of how best to deal with this kind of situation, always better not to respond at your angriest moment, but to step away and ask yourself two questions. And one is the response going to get me what I want? And which brings us to how we negotiate with these kinds of people. Now, as I said before, you're not going to change their worldview. You're not going to change what they think, either about you or anybody else. All you can do in that situation is get what you need. So the starting point in any discussion you have with that kind of person is understanding you're not going to change them, one, but two, and way more important, you need to come into any kind of discussion understanding not what it is you want, but what it is you need. So my clients in this case needed something, and ironically, it wasn't from the egg. They didn't need anything from the egg. They would have been happy to buy out his position, but there was something far more important to them that was coming from a third party that they wanted to achieve in this transaction. And I kept reminding them every time they had that negative response to the egg, I brought them back to, let's get back to what you really want to achieve. What do you need here? You need to get the third party agreement. And the third party is prepared to make that agreement, but only provided that you satisfy the egg. And the egg had a list of demands. Actually, it wasn't that long. It was about four demands, and it was all about money. So I asked the clients at the beginning, are you prepared to spend this amount of money to get what you want from the other party? And the answer was yes. And then every time the egg acted up or threatened, and the other thing about eggs is they love to threaten, and the question is how you call them on those promises that they're going to destroy you or wreak havoc on your lives. But if you can step back from that, not respond to it, and stick to what your objective is, what it is you need, you can actually succeed. So at the end of the day, what my clients got out of this was they avoided a war that the egg would have been more than happy to have. They got from the third party what they wanted, and it was all about forcing them to consider and reconsider and reconsider. This is how much it's going to cost. The egg isn't going to be negotiable. So, I mean, the other thing we tend to walk into is the assumption that when we're entering into a discussion or negotiation, it isn't just about money or isn't just about business. It can be in your personal life. But when you enter into one of those discussions, thinking that the egg is going to be amenable, thinking that the egg is going to have a reasonable kind of negotiation with you, you're deluding yourself. So as long as you come into that understanding, here are the list of demands. If I'm not able to satisfy them, I should probably expect that this isn't going to end well. Which takes us to something we'll probably discuss at further length in a further chat, and that is how much leverage you have coming into a negotiation. So when you're negotiating with an egg or with anybody else, it's a function of two things. One is what you need, but the second is what you're prepared to give up and how much leverage you have or how much power you have over the other party to achieve it. So if you know what they need is way more valuable to them than what you need, you can often use that leverage in the negotiation to your own advantage. If you know they can't afford not to come to an agreement, that's an advantage you have. If you don't need to have an agreement, that's an advantage you have. But in the situation I was in, the parties needed to end the tension that they had in a relationship. They needed something from the third party. They couldn't go on without it. And as long as they understood that the goal, and this took us 9 months to achieve. So it was 9 months of this constant stress and anger. And I kept reminding the clients in the situation, this will come to an end. This is only about money. And once you do it, your lives looking forward will be the lives you originally envisaged, filled with joy and happiness and achieving your goals, which you can't achieve with the egg sitting there at the table. So ultimately, dealing with the egg is always a matter on focusing on your objectives, deciding what you want to achieve, and finally, and there's a final point I'm going to make this morning before I open it in case you have any questions, taking your ego out of the way, which is the hardest part. Because giving in to someone who is mean-spirited, who is an angry person, who you can't stand another minute to deal with, dealing with that is often about putting your ego aside, deciding you're prepared to tolerate any perceived indignity. And I say indignity because it's completely subjective. It's all in your head. Remember, this is the other person behaving badly. It's not a reflection on you. But how often, whether it's in your personal life or otherwise, do you get involved in these kinds of head-butting situations with someone who you know is a negative in your life, and you continue to do it? Why? Because some part of your brain is telling you it's an indignity not to respond. Which takes us back to the point I made at the beginning. You're not going to change anyone's worldview. You're not going to change what people think unless they're influenced by others. So you're far better off accepting you're not going to change them and focus always on what you need. Focus on humor, focus on not sending that email response that will make you temporarily feel better, but only hurt you. Shireen has asked, how can you manage the client's emotions and reactions while dealing with the egg? And that was my greatest challenge, and it took me 9 months to do it. I use two techniques. One is I tell them when they have the negative reaction to type out the email response and send it to me and only me. And what I have discovered is the writing down of the emotional response is a form of catharsis. It allows them, instead of suppressing the anger and the hurt and the rage, they get it out. They look at it on the page. They're even able to send it to me. And I find usually within 24 hours, they're able to laugh about it because they see just how upset they've gotten and it's gotten out of them. So that I find is a very useful way. The second thing I do, and I had one client, like this would happen once a week, and we'd be talking, and I'm going to call her Joe, not her or his real name, but we get on the phone and they'd begin their rant about how these two people were ruining their lives and how evil they were, and I just say, listen, just remember, ask yourself one question, Joe. What is your objective? And the answer is always the same. I need to get them out, and I need to buy out the position of one of these people. I said, exactly. I said, that's all we focus on. And once we've achieved that, they'll be out of your lives. Now, in a business situation, it's a lot easier to say than a personal situation, but sometimes even in a personal situation, that may be the only conclusion. Mike, really good point. He's asked, humor to diffuse a tense situation can work, and sometimes can inflame the issue. What humor should you avoid? And this, I think the one rule of thumb is anything that is derogatory. In other words, anything that's making fun of anybody usually is a loser. Anything that makes it look like or might perceive to be insulting, and your best source of humor can be self-deprecating. So anything that pokes fun at yourself will generally win, because really, who are what are you going to lose? But I think what you're trying to do is just move the egg off his or her anger, even momentarily. But laughing and saying that's the stupidest thing I ever heard usually is not a winning strategy. But laughing and saying, something as neutral as you could possibly make it, I think is the short answer. Will it always work? I don't know. I haven't had a disaster happen on the humor front yet, but that doesn't mean it won't happen. In which case, I'll gather you all together and we'll do another one of these. Any other questions? Patrick, what of these strategies don't work, although you've tried all avenues? Not every negotiation ends successfully. That's the sad truth, which is why in these situations you have to ask yourself, what's your bottom? You always have to go into a negotiation knowing what your bottom line is. How far will you go? What's the level beneath which you won't go any further? And unfortunately, sometimes, and what's the most important question is, what's your tolerance for ongoing war? And if you don't have the resources, or you don't have the stomach for it, you need to factor that into how much you're prepared to give up to get what you want. And you may not get what you want. You may only get half of what you need. But unless and you also need to size, if you're an advisor, you need to size up your clients for this. I used to tell my clients who, I did a lot of tax planning, and every so often someone would walk in and say, listen, I've seen this particular tax plan. And I asked them two questions. One, assume for the moment that the tax plan gets attacked by the tax department. What will be your ability to sleep through 5 to 10 years of litigation. And if it's not going to bother me at all, I'd say, okay, now you have to pass the second test. And the second test is, well, could you say the exact same thing about your significant other while you're going through this? So if you can pass both tests, then go ahead. If either test leads you to no, I can't imagine living through that, then don't do it. So same thing on in terms of dealing with the egg. The question is, what's the cost to get out, and how do you value peace of mind in terms of what it's going to cost? And again, the final answer, Patrick, is if nothing works, then maybe you're stuck. And I know in the world of personal relationships, sometimes the only answer is to cut off the person and cut off all contact with the person. And I've actually seen that with in another one of my client relationships where that is exactly what happened between two brothers. And once the brother who felt regularly offended finally dealt with it, shockingly, their relationship began to improve. Surprised me. I didn't think it was possible. Anything else? Keep any of you any longer. We've been for about 20 minutes now, and I want to thank you all for attending. I'll be coming up with another topic for next week. If there's any of you who have anything, feel free to send me a LinkedIn message or email if you have my email address. And I look forward to seeing all of you again. Shireen, thank you. Patrick, Mike, I'm not sure who else is left in here. I appreciate you being here. Rahmat, if you're still here. Manal, Hitam, have a great day.